Good evening, ghoulies and ghosties and long-leggedy beasties. This is Alex, coming at you from the underworld, and welcome back to another episode of... In this episode, I'm reviewing the Jewish Book of Horror, edited by Josh Schlossberg, which I hope I'm pronouncing his last name correctly. If not, I do apologize. And this was produced by the Denver Horror Collective Press. Now, before I get started, I would like to note that I really wish I could have finished this book sooner. However, because of me taking my time with this anthology, it really allowed me to savor each story. And this was actually a good thing because I learned a lot about Jewish culture and there were a lot of thought-provoking stories. Also, I would like to add that I came across this book on Instagram, and as soon as I saw the cover, I knew this was exactly what I had been looking for, as I had been trying to find some Jewish-based horror fiction for quite some time. So, without second thought, I slammed my money down, and as soon as I received the book, I began reading, and needless to say, I was not disappointed. But without me rambling on any further, let's go on and start our journey into Jewish horror. The Jewish Book of Horror is a collection of 22 stories as well as some pretty cool introductions. Like, at first we have a piece on scary stories in Jewish tradition by Rabbi John Carrier. We have an origin of the Jewish Book of Horror by Josh Schlossberg. And we have an introduction into Jewish horror by Molly Adams. From here, we're thrown into a mix of stories that are historic and modern, as well as lore and religious based. Which, among these stories, we have a tale about a pirate who encounters a death ship, Dybbuk's evil offspring, and much more. In the introduction of this anthology, Josh Schlossberg explained the Jewish Book of Horror came about long after he encountered a manuscript of 22 stories at his grandparents' synagogue. Upon his reading, he learned that supposedly these tales were passed down from the days when Moses lived in Midian, but unfortunately the tales were poorly written. Nonetheless, something drove him to take the manuscript to research. When he found nothing online, he feared he stole an author's first draft, so he put it away and forgot about it. After his grandparents passed away, he dug up the manuscript and decided to pursue publishing. Yet, with the stories being in such poor condition, he reached out to 22 authors and asked them to each rewrite a story in their own words. Fun facts! Even though this anthology provided quite a few great stories, here's some information on the authors who contributed the best of the best. Richard Dansky, who authored Own Seas of Blood and Salt, is a game writer and designer. He has published 7 novels and a short story collection, and he has contributed to multiple anthologies. Michael Pico, who authored The Horse Leech Has Two Maws, received his BA in English from Western State University of Colorado. He has published the award-winning collection Scenes from the Carnival Lounge. Also, he has contributed to multiple anthologies. John Baltusberger, who authored Eighth Night, is a diverse author who isn't tied to one specific genre. While he has contributed to extreme horror, urban fantasy, science fiction, cosmic horror, and epic verse, he revisits themes of mysticism, faith, sin, and personal responsibility. Aside from his works of fiction, he has also written a guide for meditation. Emily Ruth Verona, who authored A Purim Story, received her BA in Creative Writing and Cinema Studies from the State University of New York at Purchase. Among her achievements, she has won the Pinch Literary Award in Fiction. Also, she is a Bram Stoker Award nominee, a Jane Austen Short Story Award finalist, and a Luke Bittmead Bursary finalist. Now that we have that covered, it's time to move on to the spoiler section, which, if you haven't read this book before, I'm about to reveal some things that could ruin the experience for you. So if you would like to click away, all you have to do is scroll down to the comments section and you'll see that I have a comment with the timestamp pinned at the top. Once you click that timestamp, it will direct you away from the spoilers and bring you to the thoughts section. Now, you only have 17 seconds to do this. So, ready, set, go! Since everyone's had the opportunity to click away, I would like to talk about three of my favorite stories. First up is the tale On Seas of Blood and Salt by Richard Dansky, which this is a pirate story about a captain who has received warning from his guardian angel that he and his crew should not invade an approaching ship because there are some ill tidings at hand. Well, the captain ignores the warning and proceeds forward, only to discover that the ship that they plan to attack is actually a death ship of the damned. I have always been a sucker for pirate-based horror stories, and when I read this, I absolutely loved how the ship appeared to be this ragged monstrosity that was covered in barnacles, and how the crew looked like they were the skeletons covered in leathery flesh. But what I really loved about this story was after the captain had set the ship on fire, he encounters it again 6 days later and the ship is still burning, which this reminded me of that really kick-ass car burning scene in Christine. Then, to satisfy my splatterpunk needs, the author was pretty badass in describing the victims on the death ship and how they were forced to remain alive as long as the ship was sailing. Next up is the tale The Horse Leech Has Two Maws by Michael Pico, which this is told from the perspective of a gay prisoner who is forced to perform on his violin at a Holocaust way station. And it's during his time here that he discovers the way station has been invaded by these creatures known as the Acula, which have arrived at that location with the prisoners. This was an absolutely terrifying story, and it was probably my favorite out of the entire anthology. Like, to start with, we're introduced to a location that is full of hopelessness. Then, adding on to those vibes, we are confronted with the scenario of being trapped in a Holocaust way station while these supernatural beings are picking off the prisoners. But what really struck me was the beautiful and poetic prose that the author used, and because of his approach, it made everything even that much more disturbing. And last is the tale Eighth Night by John Baltusberger, which this focuses on a lady who goes to her boyfriend's homeland to celebrate Hanukkah. But once they arrive, they discover that the land has been placed under a curse, and the only way to break this curse is if a Gentile lights a menorah candle every night of Hanukkah. Well, since she's not Jewish, and they think that it'll be fun to say that she broke a curse while they were on vacation, they give it a go, and she ends up trapped in an epic battle with a Dybbuk. This tale really sucked me into the concept because I have always loved the idea of good versus evil. Also, because of the dreary vibes that the land had, I really felt like I was in the middle of a folk horror story. Not to mention, this was an extremely intense segment, as each night progressively became more hardcore as the Dybbuk was trying to discourage the protagonist from succeeding. Although these are my top 3 favorite stories, there were more tales in this book that I would consider to be among my favorites. So I'm going to use this opportunity in the next segment to elaborate on another story that I would consider to be in my top. I would like to take this opportunity to bitch about the Grandpa in a Purim story by Emily Ruth Verona. So let me paint a picture for you here. The story is about this poor single mother by the name of Maria who has been avoiding taking her daughter Natalie to carnival for the last 5 years because Natalie's grandpa is this old fart who thinks she's an abomination. But after him begging Maria, she finally gives in and they roll up outside his synagogue. Then lo and behold, guess who's waiting for her outside? That's right, her baby daddy who hasn't had shit to do with Natalie since the day she was born. Anywho, Marie tells her baby daddy to talk to the hand, then they go inside where Natalie starts to play games. But, of course, no one can enjoy themselves because Natalie's grandpa is judging every move the poor girl makes. So Marie decides she ain't gonna put up with this shit, so she takes them outside where she's about to read the old fart, but she gets knocked out. Then when she wakes up, she realizes that the old fart roofied her, and he plans to kill Natalie because he believes that she's a literal demon seed. Now, truth be it, Natalie's mom did get some demon ding-dong, and Natalie really is hellspawn. But that's besides the point. The main thing is, this old fart couldn't get with the program, so Natalie did the only rational thing, which was to set him on fire. Then, you know what this sweet little baby does? She goes right over there to her mama and she says, "Mom, I'm sorry that I ruined Purim." And the mom does exactly what I would have done. She says, "No, honey, you did not ruin Purim. Your grandfather did." Which, truth be it, had he not been such a judgmental ass and actually helped the poor girl play pin the tail on the donkey or some shit, he still might be here to this day. The Jewish Book of Horror is an anthology that's full of range and variety. And out of the 22 stories, 7 of those were outstanding, 8 were good, 5 were okay, and 2 just weren't my cup of tea. Which, as you can tell, there were more good stories in this book than there were bad. Now, as far as the outstanding stories are concerned, I would include On Seas of Blood and Salt, A Purim Story, The Horse Leech Has Two Maws, Eighth Night, Bread and Salt, The Divorce from God, and Bar Mitzvah Lessons. Overall, the main focus of this book is obviously Jewish culture. And since I'm not Jewish, there were a few aspects that I was unfamiliar with, but I believe this book did a superb job in introducing different customs and words to me, and doing it in such a way where I could get the gist of it, but for an individual who was already seasoned in Judaism, they weren't just sitting there thinking, okay, hurry up, get to the point, I already know this. So I feel like that was a really good balance. But even still, there were times that I did have to reference Google to learn a little bit more about customs and certain words, which I don't see that being a bad thing because I really had a fun time educating myself on this subject matter. Now, as you can imagine, even though Jewish culture is the overall focus of this book, each story does present its own topic. And even though I won't be able to elaborate on everything, I would like to touch on the subjects that I noticed the most. First off, in the tale On Seas of Blood and Salt, the story's lead goes against the advice of his guardian angel, which this leads him to a great deal of turmoil that he could have avoided. And while this story doesn't come across as preachy or anything like that, we do see where humans have free will, and the voice of the guardian angel more so seems like his conscience. Also, it shows how even though we might get good advice from other sources, most humans tend to be in the mindset that they want to find things out the hard way. Then, with what is perhaps the scariest story in this book, The Horse Leech Has Two Maws presents the Holocaust, which, as we all know, was a very horrible time in history. But in this story, it takes that real nightmare and suggests that the negativity of the concentration camps and the way stations was so great that it attracted demons to those locations.
Now, I've always been a firm believer that if a place has enough negativity there, it's going to act like a sponge and attract more negativity. Which, this is why when I used to do paranormal investigations, I would always refuse going to graveyards, abandoned hospitals, asylums, prisons. The list continues. Next up, in the Tell Eighth Night, we have the epic battle of good versus evil. But in this concept, in order to break a curse, a Gentile must successfully light every candle on a menorah throughout Hanukkah. Which, to me, this tale really spoke volumes about the human will, and if the protagonist is determined enough, they will literally go through hell in order to achieve their goal. And last is a Purim story, which this tale really shows the bond between mother and child. And it pushes that bond to the limits, as it shows if you have a maternal or paternal instinct, you're going to love your child no matter what. And without giving away spoilers, what really impressed me about this story was how the author was able to manipulate my feelings in regards to who I felt sorry for. Overall, there was only one story in this book that scared me. However, there were quite a few that were creepy, and there were a few that were gross outs. But for the most part, I continued reading because I wanted to see what would happen next, and I loved learning about Jewish culture and folklore. The Jewish Book of Horror, edited by Josh Schlossberg, was an enlightening and entertaining read. And while we have stories that focus on everyday scares, there were quite a few frightening tales that focused on holidays like Purim, Hanukkah, and Passover. And since this book has a great diversity to it, I'm sure there's a little bit of something in here for everyone. So, at the end of the day, if you are a lover of horror who is looking to have a cultural expansion with the next book that you read, then I highly recommend the Jewish Book of Horror. Well, as many of you might have noticed, I have not been asking for book recommendations at the end of my videos for quite some time now. And the main reason why is because I have a pretty big TBR pile ahead of me, and it's getting so huge, I'm afraid one day it's going to fall over and kill one of our cats. But truth be it, if that happens, I'm sure I can bring them back to life with some jumper cables or whatnot. So I'm going to go on and use this opportunity to go on and ask you if there are any Jewish horror books you could recommend, specifically ones that are written by Jewish horror authors. So please, if there's anything out there, load it up in the comments because I would really love to expand my library in that regards. But with that said, it's now time to close out the video, but before I do, I would like to thank these amazing people for contributing to my Patreon account.
Here's a list of my Patreon contributors, and as you can tell, some of them are creators, so be sure to check out their work. And if you would like to contribute as well, I do have a link to my Patreon in the description section of this episode, where for $5 a month I'll give you a shout out at the end of my videos. And if there is a certain profession you would like for me to tie to your name, just let me know and I'll gladly do that. Also, for $10 a month, I do have another tier where I will still give you the shout out as you see here, but I do creepy photography on the side, so at the beginning of every month, I'll send you over one of my creepy photos. From there, you can print it off, do whatever you like with it. So if you're able to do this, that's awesome. If not, no sweat. I just hope you return to this channel so we can have a good time together. Also, if you would like to follow me on social media, links to my Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok are all available in the description section of this episode. And I honestly don't know why this is happening. I guess that the stars just aligned to my favor or something. But my TikTok is really starting to pick up a lot of momentum. So I really appreciate that, everyone. I have been producing videos where I'm matching up a book and a song. So those are starting to get a lot of likes and everything, and I'm just amazed at how I'm getting a turnover from that.
So if any TikTokers are watching this, thank you so much for that support. And if you haven't gone over to my TikTok yet, be sure to do so because we're having fun over there too. So until we see each other again, I hope everyone is doing well and sweet nightmares.